universe is necessarily a mind,
Yep, by
according to your
definition.
definition?
Yep.
Okay. Do you think that's the way people normally use the word mind?
Mm. It has something to do with it, but like immediately in that sense, no.
Okay.
It's linked to it by materiality, and what it means to be material has to be something which is clearly not going to be self-external like the physical is. But most
Yeah,
people
it's
don't think
like,
about it to that extent. So
I don't know, when I think about a mind, I tend to think some sort of construct of like a, conscious biological entity or something,
sure, and that's a finite mind, where what is part of the mind is something that is completely self-internal. It's not really going to be appealed to in external ways. So, for example, the nature of your feelings belongs in a domain entirely of the mind. It's not a physical thing. It's not going to be appealed to in any way of that kind. Insofar as we're going to understand them, we have to understand them as the kind that they are, and this is not a spatial temporal thing.
So would, would feelings be a property of a mind?
Um, sure, determinations of it.
But it's not a necessary property, right?
It's a necessary property for us as finite minds. It's not a necessary property for an infinite mind.
What are the properties of an infinite mind other than your self-containment definition?
Well, whatever properties it wishes to determine within itself, because it
It
is.
wishes? Does it have
Well,
agency?
yes, it does, because it is self-internal. So there's nothing outside of it which would make it what it is. So whatever it is, insofar as it is, has to come from itself. It can't just be either. You can't say, well, what if it's a brute fact? Well, that brute fact is determined as a brute fact from somewhere. And if
I
the
guess
universe,
I guess what I'm struggling to see is the utility of considering the universe to be a mind if it's not what we typically think of what a mind is usually, Like,
the utility is just being able to make a demarcation of a certain kind for certain explanatory purposes. If you have no explanatory purposes of that kind, then indeed it's kind of useless. But that's like not amazing, because it's no more than saying like, well, I may know about atoms, but when I'm building a table, I don't give a shit about the atoms. I give a shit about the wood, and so I'm not thinking about the atoms, and the atoms are not going to be part of my explanation when I'm talking to other people.
yeah, but what explanatory power does that carry? Like that the universe is a mind.
The explanatory power is that it's obviously not going to be reducible to the problems of physicality, where with the physical world, the spatial temporal stuff, you have a runaway sequence of this causes this causes that, this is structured and conditioned by this is structured and conditioned by that, all the way forever. No matter how you put it, whether you believe in big bangs, big crunches, doesn't matter. All those things have a contingent element. You need a necessary element. This is not simply a matter of like, well, that's just maybe a human cognitive thing. No. There is a unity to reality. That unity is a self-unifying unity. There is a reality that makes itself real. Why are you muted, XD? Because probably you were here some other time and we muted you. But I'll
No,
unmute
he had
you.
a background noise, I think.
Oh, my bad. My bad.
I muted him because of the background noise.
But you get that there is a
So
qualitative difference between the totality of the universe and the stuff in the universe.
sure. So what I'm hearing is that What? It's a way to dodge the infinite regress then?
That's not a dodge. It answers it. Unlike the infinite regress is itself a dodge.
Hmm. I'm trying to get over my bias of what I think a mind to be.
Yeah, yeah. I will give it to you. This is initially strange use of this word, and especially when it's presented in abstraction, which is why I don't like it to be presented in abstraction in that way. But that's just what it is. That's what a mind is. Once you figure out the specific structures of the finite mind, it makes sense why the universe itself is a mind.
And you say that this is not. I assume what they mean by proprietary is it's not like your own definition. Or am I wrong?
I don't know why they're bringing up proprietary. Yes, it is, like in this case, not the common definition. It is proprietary to the philosophical jargon of Hegelianism. I never made any claims otherwise. You can keep like saying that you won on that, but the clip that you showed said exactly what I said it said, so keep crying about it.
You said,
If I could just throw in real quick, like conventional definitions for abstract concepts don't exist.
Definitely not. Yeah, you can't go to the dictionary and go like, what is being? It won't tell you. It will tell you some gobbledygook that doesn't mean anything.
Being is that which exists.
so you mentioned,
If you do Google it, 9 times out of 10 it'll just be circular and self-referential. It won't actually tell you anything.
well, things always get taught to logical, right? At a certain point.
Yep, this is why the universe is a mind.
That reinforces that. Hmm. So you mentioned Hegelianism.
Mm.
Is that what I would look at to understand you?
I'm sorry, what?
Hegelianism. Is that what I would look at to understand what you're communicating to us right now better?
Nope, because you will not find a single thing in the world that will make this intelligible within like 10 minutes. Or 20.
I'm not talking about a quick skimming, some summary. I'm not talking about that. But what idea communicates? Is there a name for the idea that communicates what you're saying?
Yeah, Hegelianism, but if you look up what is the Hegelian mind, good luck.
Oh yeah, you're not gonna get it. And if you look it up on Reddit, it's not gonna help you either. You're just gonna get misled.
I mean, don't
I have a
assume that I
genuine
would be
question.
doing that.
No, I'm not assuming you're doing that. I'm just saying like it'll probably just confuse you more.
Yeah.
Are you guys moral realists?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Like, in a robust sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
So you from, like, an alethic thesis?
Mm. Tell me what that word means, because I don't speak to people who normally use that word.
Oh, we got a slow boy. I was talking about, like, a modal thesis.
No.
Oh. Well, how are you realist in a robust sense, then, if you don't have, like, an account for subjunctive conditionals?
Oh, I talked to you before.
Hmm.
You're retarded.
What gave it away, the modal realism?
Yeah, and then I'm like, wait, this voice sounds familiar. And I looked at his name.
What's wrong with him?
Oh, the way he talks is obtusely verbose on purpose. He knows he's being a dick by using like big words that people normally don't use. And the stuff that he's asking is not really important.
Yeah. To communicate that kind of idea, you don't need to use the term disjunctive antecedent conditionals, or just, I think he just said disjunctive conditionals.
Yeah, disjunctive conditionals. Those things don't matter. I mean, somebody else here said they had a question. I'm sorry, what was it?
Yeah, sorry, it was me. I'm actually just getting into Hegel recently, but I'm trying to like wrap my head around it, kind of listening. I have like some background knowledge, I guess, on like other philosophy, but would you say that's kind of like the bedrock almost of like Hegel, like the world in itself through the mind?
No. The bedrock of Hegel is forget everything you know, start from zero, work through the science of logic, understand how it works, and read whatever else you want and think for yourself.
Where does it start though? Or I guess what would you say would start besides like the logical systems? Would it just be the logical systems themselves?
Well, if you need an impetus for why you should look into what he's doing with the logical system, you can read a whole bunch of secondary literature just going over the problem of skepticism, the problem of Kantianism, and the general problem that German idealism was trying to overcome, which for Hegel seems to be particularly the skeptical problem. That's what most of his prior to his big works essays are about. So, you can read those to find out the motivation and see if that motivation motivates you.
I have to take a class, that's why. That's the only reason. I'm taking philosophy for logic next semester, and it's on Hegel.
Well, yeah, then you want to understand the motivation. You should read either his earlier essays, in which he goes specifically into the issues with Kantianism, about moral skepticism, skepticism about noumena. He has an essay specifically on skepticism itself, ancient skepticism. He has an essay on the difference of Schelling's and Fichte's philosophy, also to do with skepticism. Basically, everything he does is to do with skepticism. If you read the beginnings of the Phenomenology of Spirit, the Phenomenology of Spirit's introduction and preface are both about skepticism, and the whole book is nothing but a sustained effort to like go through every position skeptically until the point where skepticism is absolutely defeated.
I see. He like tries to ground it within objectivity in a way, kind of removing from skepticism.
Well, he tries to remove the grounds of how skepticism is so certain of itself.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
I'll definitely read into that.
Yeah, you should. There's a book called All or Nothing: Systematicity, Transcendental Arguments, and Skepticism and German Idealism, and it goes all the way up to, I think, Fichte. Doesn't really go into Schelling or Hegel, but it goes up to the problem from Leibniz to Fichte through all the major thinkers in between. Very interesting book, very good about like how the problem is a very serious problem that everybody was trying to solve for a long time.
I see. So as far as like with the problem he's trying to solve from Kant, or go ahead, you got it.
Are you sure? You can finish if you want.
Well, it's really quick. Like not like from my understanding, like the problem that Kant was trying to figure out was like the question almost of like empiricism and rationalism, right? Is that like something that Hegel tacks on?
Yeah, Hegel destroys that whole problem in the Phenomenology of Spirit. By the time of Science of Logic, like he just says either if you need to destroy that problem for yourself, read that. If not, just read the introductions to the Science of Logic or the introductions to the Encyclopedia Logic, and he just kind of goes a quick takedown about the immediate logical problems of these and why, honestly, you should not take them seriously, and why you should just have the courage to think what he's about to lay down.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I'm curious, when you brought up the whole skepticism thing, the one thing that caught my attention was you mentioned that using skepticism, you pull a part of it, or you just remain so skeptical until the point that skepticism in and of itself is defeated. And the way that I'm understanding that is that how is it that this would work, or this philosophy would work in I guess in a scientific sense, where like when we look at gravity, for example, skepticism, like when I'm trying to understand what you're saying is like, how can you how can skepticism be defeated when we come up to theories that can't be proven fully, such as gravity or even like, for example, the Big Bang Theory. Is this something that is like possible still within that philosophical mindset, or what?
You should be skeptical of those. You should be skeptical of those because they are very dogmatic positions in science. So the issue of skepticism is not an issue of like, can I empirically like observe something? No, the issue of skepticism is, do I know what I'm even talking about? Is the thing that I'm talking about even a thing? Or am I just deluding myself?
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so I mean, okay, I guess it doesn't make. I mean, it doesn't. It's not contradictory in of itself, since you're saying that you should be skeptical of that. But what about what about? So it's more so just skeptical in terms of your understanding of how the world works, rather than what you're actually being skeptical of. Is that what you're trying to say?
I think the most people, sorry, the way most people think of skepticism is that it has to do with something with their understanding, whereas classical skepticism, which is the only true skepticism, all the other ones are basically like people pretending to be skeptics and being cowards. Classical skepticism just basically takes it for granted that you need to prove things ultimately on certainty. The whole thing about epistemic access of empirical stuff, my eyesight, and testing, that's a no-go. None of that stuff is going to be reliable. It's always going to be questionable. The only things that are open to possibly, maybe not being questionable are going to be categorical things, concepts. And those things concern, well, what is it that I think things as things really are? But the problem with skepticism is you'll never be able to prove anything to a skeptic. Because insofar as you lay down that something is the case, even if it's coherent, they can always question, well, how do you know that this is a thing that's even real, let alone the case? And the skeptic is not skeptical of one thing. They're not skeptical of reason itself. They're skeptical of all the senses. They're skeptical of all finite claims, all specific claims, and they can argue against all of them perfectly fine. When it comes to it, the skeptic themselves is not aware of why and how they can be certain that their reasoning has anything to do with a possibility of truth, or that even truth is anything to be considered, that it's anything, well, real. Like it's impossible to talk about reality without talking about truth and all these other things. So they don't consider that, one, their reasoning process, it may itself be questionable, and they don't consider that the things that one is considering may actually have a form which is not going to be subject to my subjective concerns about how I may know it, as opposed to having the thing. I'm sorry, that probably rambled a bit too long on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to unpack, so I'm gonna have to think on that, obviously. I mean, I'm just trying to like conceptualize how would, at least the way that you describe a skeptic, how would a skeptic then, like in this classical sense that you're thinking, how would they operate in the real world in the sense? Since like nothing can, like, I shouldn't say nothing, but like there's a lot of things that you can't say with absolute certainty that this is the truth as per se. How would they then operate in the sense in like real?
They accept that it's doxa. That's how they operate. They accept, I can't say this is or is not true. So, all I have is my opinion that it is this or that. And I can live with that. And, and the problem with the skeptic is just to come to peace with that. To come to peace that I have to accept that all I have is opinion. And that I don't get to know at all. And that there's something extremely admirable about that, in which a lot of people don't want to accept that. And they want to, then we can say like, oh, well, we can have truth with like probability and we don't have to be certain. Yes, you do. That's like saying, I can gamble and I can be confident in my gamble when I don't know the probability of my gamble. I don't know how many sides the dice I'm rolling has. I don't know what my chance actually is. I can't make a rational assessment whether I'm likely to be lucky or not.
Okay, but I mean, okay, it seems to be the case then that
Yeah, you're muted, John.
So, okay, but so from what I've understand, what you just to unpack that there, if you're talking about something, for example, like let's talk about blackjack, right?
Mm-hmm.
You, if you know how to read cards and you know how the game operates and just how card works and all that shit, fuck, I don't know how to explain it properly, but
Yeah,
if you are aware of it to a certain degree, you may not be able to control it each and every single one and know for certain that you're going to win, but there's some way of like determining that you're going to have a greater probability of winning rather than losing. So if you play, 1,000 times and over 1,000 times you keep playing the same amount of money, you're going to come out with a profit because you've increased your probability of winning to, let's say, zero point 0.6, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I get what you're saying, that skeptically you can't say with absolute certainty that you're going to win, but if you know that probabilistically you're going to have a positive outcome if you stay to all the consistent variables for that blackjack game, why wouldn't you want to then say, I'm going to win? Or I am going to win?
Because you don't actually know. So when you say certainty, the skeptic has the strongest requirement of certainty, because it can't be my subjective certainty about this. Because there's the things that I believe about the world. I believe that when I'm playing blackjacks, only such and such conditions are in play. But that's not how reality is. The reality is far beyond that. I may think hey, I'm gonna go play this and that. You don't know, there might be some kind of weird physical conditions, whatever. There are actually conditions beyond that. You don't actually know the real probabilities. Now you can go with some amount of guesswork in which, given established opinion and your own subjective experience, in which things make some kind of coherent sense, you can go ahead and say, well, I have confidence. But confidence and knowledge are not the same thing. And that's the thing that's the problem. The skeptic says, I want to know. I don't just want to have confidence, because our confidence can just be illusory. But I want to know. And to know is to know exactly.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I still, the one part that I would disagree on is that having the knowledge, for example, of, again, just going back to the whole blackjack scenario that I was talking about, if I have the knowledge, and let's just say I have the ability to count all cards, can't I then, assuming again, when I sit down and play this game and I know that the probability, and computers have found out, let's just say it's 0.65 of me winning. If I play 1,000 games and I keep my money that I put in consistent all the way through, I can say with certainty that I'm going to win. No?
No, you can't. It will still remain a probability, because, again, you don't know the entire factors of the universe. You don't know how many sides the dice actually has. There's the sides that you've seen, and there's the sides that have worked out for you. But there's more than that dice rolling in actuality. So on the empirical basis, you may be confident, but you can't say you know. And then on the factor of the rational basis, for example, and here's you can't say actually certainly. You can say, look, blackjack has these specific rules. You have so many cards, you have so many players, you have so many hands and things that you can play. Given certain factors, just of the structure of the game itself, necessarily certain things are going to be consequences. And the skeptic will say, yes, that is true. But the question is the thing that you're actually talking about the kind of thing that we're actually concerned with? When we're concerned with talking about truth, we're not concerned about things that we have subjectively made up. Well, we know exactly what they are because we made them up. We're not going to be confused about, maybe the rules for blackjack are actually different. Well, no, we made them up. We set them up. We made them explicit. But that's not what is in question for skepticism. Skepticism is not that stupid. Those things are conventions, and skepticism allows for conventions. So those things, yeah. So those things are perfectly fine for the skeptic. They're like, yeah, they're opinions, all of them, and we have facts about those opinions. But they're opinions nonetheless. What we want to know is truth. We want to know, is the tree what I say it is? Does it actually do what I say it does? And it's those things which we don't make as conventions, but already are the case in some way, that are the problem.
Yeah, fair enough. I get what you're saying. It sounds like it. I mean, in my opinion, if you go to the extreme, it sounds like it could be very unhealthy to one's sanity. But I understand like the philosophy behind it now that you explained it.
Well, no, it's actually not. All that it does is that it makes you humble. It makes you humble in the case that you admit, I really don't have an
Yeah,
actual
true.
knowledge. And I accept that all I have is an opinion. Now, my opinions can work perfectly fine. I mean, after all, I got to eat and work and all these other things. And I still do it. And the only thing is, I'm not going to be making these grand metaphysical stories to other people. And you'll claim that I know when in fact I don't. And what I can do is show other people that when they claim to know, they definitely don't know.
Well,
Unless,
even, okay. So I'm curious then, like, wouldn't you say then, okay, so then how would you explain it in this context then? Like, if I'm a person that builds houses and I construct a house, and let's just say all the knowledge, or in your case, sorry, my opinion, this, how, the thing that I'm not grasping though is how is this not knowledge? Because I'm able to, all the stuff that I've learned on how to build a house, all the formulas, all the maths behind it, all the properties of like what constitutes like how to build a good house and all that, and when I put it all together it structurally worked from a physics perspective. How is it that that would not be knowledge and that would be just an opinion?
because you don't have an ultimate ground. It's like, so if, and this is also an issue that came up with skepticism. And one of the problems was that people wanted to make foundations because it became very clear that part of the strategy of skepticism is to drive you to foundations in which, like, they'll be like, how do you know this? How do you know that? How do you know that? And or they'll open up a problem where you thought there was no problem. In which, like, you may have what appears to be relative knowledge, and we have that all the time, right? There's things that we appear to know, but which, in the long run, in certain cases, we will find out the thing that we thought we knew and we thought was a thing is not in fact a thing. Like, it's like, you may think that something is a good investment, and all the signals may tell you this is a good investment. But guess what? Once your money's in and locked in, 3 months later, the market crashes. Everything you knew told you, you had a justified true belief. This is the way people called it for a while. That, or a justified belief, you assumed it was true. That you had the full story, but you don't know what you're ignorant of. And that's the problem. There are things ignorant of both as consequences, but there's also things you're ignorant of both as conditions, as, like, prior assumptions. And
Okay.
and if you don't know either of those, or particularly the most important ones is the assumptions. If you don't know the assumptions, you've got a castle in the sky, and it may look good, but it may not be good. And the question is, do we know that it is actually good? It's like you gave the example of constructing a house. Plenty of times people constructed houses and edifices in which they think they've got a good design and a good structural foundation. But in that, they did not pay attention to the actual geological conditions. They did not make the foundations actually, like, fit for the environment. The thing, they miscalculated the physics according to the known physics, and it ends up, crashing down. So given all the things that they knew, it was a good judgment based on the assumptions. And so if the assumptions had been true, the whole thing would have been true, and it would have worked. But the reason it didn't work is because the assumptions ended up being not true. And that's the problem.
But I'm curious though, like for like even just like with that aspect, like I guess think this with the construction one, can't we make the argument though that this is knowledge though? And I guess this is the argument I'm making, that that is knowledge, because even though you're right, you can't control for every single variable, and there might be a variable that you missed out on, like for example, like you said, geologically, you might be setting up a foundation under some fucking marshes that you really should have gone deeper, right? And let's say you do miss that. I don't understand how this still wouldn't be knowledge, because next time, let's say if you were to apply this, all things being equal, all other variables being equal, as long as you're aware of, this problem doesn't exist anymore. And we can see with structures like, like at least in Western societies with like a stringent level of like regulations and all that stuff, housing very rarely, like we have these issues of like houses coming down. It occurs, you're right, but we can say with like a very high degree of certainty, and I would say that this is because of the knowledge that we've built, that we can say that your house is a safe house. If it meets all these codes and regulations, that this house is a safe house. Would you? Isn't that's to me sounds like it's still knowledge. It's not perfect knowledge, but nonetheless, it's still knowledge that can yield consistent results.
Yes, but again, it's only apparent. So that's the thing. The skeptic has a far more stringent requirement, which is ultimately the requirement of all knowledge. We can't pretend that it's not. That the implication of any claim of knowledge is that I have some grounding in reality. I have some grounding objectively on something that is really real. And it can't be my opinion, and it can't be a convention. So, for example, with the housing thing, even if you can make structurally sound housing, part of an issue of housing is, what is housing? And this is not a problem that we think of as individuals. It's mainly states do think about this, and cities think about this too. What are we talking about when we speak about we need housing, we ought to have housing, and what is the housing purpose for? And it's those things that become quickly easy to show that these things are just full of assumptions of which we have no good reason to think that they're worthwhile. If you think housing is just a place for somebody to keep their stuff and to sleep, then something like the slums in Hong Kong. I don't know if you've ever seen those, super tiny, cramped, horrible things, are good housing. They don't collapse. They're structurally fine, and we can just pack in the most people that we can in all of these. But is that what housing really is? Is that actually a good idea, given what things really are? Because we can go by the assumption that if housing is just a place to put your stuff in, it's, and to sleep in, then, we can make stuff for that. But is that really the case? Is a house not more? Is a house not a home? Is it not a place to raise a family? Is it not a place to relax? Can you really relax when you're fucking crammed in a little box with, 1,000 other people on your block? Is it, is that really conducive to what the human being actually is? Is it psychologically good for a person to be that? So even though the housing may be physically sound enough that, we make them work consistently, the question that comes though, is the thing that we're actually engaging in even itself rational, given the purposes that we claim to be making it for?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, good food for thought. I'll definitely have to think on this. Appreciate you answering the questions, though.
Yeah, no problem.
Can I do another question?
Yeah, sure.
All right. How does Hegel kind of solve skepticism in his way? Can you give me you can go on in long tangent. It's fine. I'm listening. I'm observing.
Basically, he proves in the phenomenology very easily, and also in logic. But it's actually clear in the phenomenology, but only after you read the logic, really. We assume. Yeah. So I'll just go on it. So we assume consciousness, and consciousness is already assumed in the fact that it exists, and consciousness is that which is a subject faced by an object to be known. And I thought this was kind of interesting after the fact of how I learned how he uses the method, how it works, that this is a very good definition. But it also happens to be that Hegel was probably not even thinking that deeply about it, that he chose that name precisely because that's literally what the name means. Conscience, etymologically, comes from Latin. It means con with science, knowledge. So, if you ever wondered why he calls the structure he gives in phenomenology the consciousness, that's why.
Gotcha. That's actually kind of cool. But yeah, continue, sorry.
Yeah, and so unlike people today who speak about consciousness and they talk about qualia and what it's like to be, people in Hegel's time were not confused in that way. It was straightforward. Consciousness was concerning the way a subject knows an object. That's what it means to be conscious.
Mhm.
Conscious. Well, anyways, a consciousness assumes there is an object. In this case, like sense certainty. And sense certainty says, well, there's a world of objects out there. You know, they're the truth. They are the being. And I don't need to say anything more than that. You know, really, why would I say anything? You know, words, you know, what is a photograph, you know, is worth 1,000 words, and an actual object is worth, you know, an infinity of words. No amount of words that you could ever speak would exhaust the detail of the physical object. And so what this conscious says, well, I'm not going to get in the middle of it. You know, if I want to have a conversation about something with somebody, I want to teach them something, or they want to communicate something, well, I'll just show them the thing. You know, why waste words? So, you know, this conscious speaks in this, here, and now. Even that's a bit too much, but, you know, in like these are distinctions that it shouldn't really make, but nonetheless, you can still make them and it works anyways. Well, in doing the this, here, and now, this conscious wants to communicate verbally, you know, some specific object, but at least there's an immediate contradiction. That object is, the way I say it, this is an abstract category. You know, it applies to anything that would be a this, but anything that would be a this is anything I could point out. So, you know, if I just say this abstractly, you don't know what I'm saying. And I don't know what I'm saying. I know what I'm saying because I'm intuiting, perceiving whatever it is that I want to communicate. But the person who merely hears my claim doesn't know what the hell I've said because I've specified nothing. You know, the apple is this, the tree is this, the house is this, the now is this, I am this. So there's a problem just like the medium of knowledge and the thing that I want to talk about. But it's also the case that I think I have to be immediate. You know, and I think that the reason I can only say this is because I want to use the least mediation to get in between myself, the thing, and the other people who I'm trying to communicate with. So we want to get thought out of the middle when we want to be absolutely immediate.
Mm-hmm.
But
which language?
Yeah, which language can't do in a way, because language, well, it can, because this is immediate, at least verbally. The problem is, of course, consciousness has made an assumption of an immediacy which doesn't exist. Because not only is language already mediated in the fact that it's a universal against a particular, and it's something, a verbalization of the subject towards, you know, another subject. There's also the fact that, you know, in pointing out a thing, a this or a here or a now, that language that I'm using is not actually immediate. You know, a this is a this because it's not another this. A here is a here because it's not another here. A now is a now because it's not another now. So snuck in without my intention, I try to say something immediate, but I can't. I say something mediated. But not only that, the things themselves that I'm pointing out. If I point to an apple, well, the apple's clearly not immediate. It's got a shape, you know, it's got a color, it comes from other things. Even if I take away time and, you know, the apple's just the immediate moment right now, the apple is itself mediated. It has all these relationships. So obviously, if I want to speak the truth, I have to have a related conceptual language as well.
Oh, quick question. Can you just like define mediating in this term that we're using it in this reference?
Anything that would be in the middle. Anything that would be linking, unifying, relating.
Gotcha. Interconnectedness, basically.
Yeah. And so anyways, so the issue is, if I really thought this way, if I really thought immediately, and I took my mediating capacities away from, like, you know, communication, I could not communicate at all. Not only could I not communicate at all, I could not perceive at all. Because I only recognize, because I can recognize an object as a this or a that or whatever, only insofar as, like, my perceptions are already, like, determinate, and I can recognize these determinate perceptions. So, you know, I'm not a being that's like a one-way processor. You know, I'm a multi-processing unit. I'm processing sound, sight, touch, all these things at once, shapes. Sure. But if my experience was as immediate as my thought, then I would experience things like, I would look at the apple and I would focus on just the redness, and then the shapeness, and then like the other aspects of it. But each one at a single time. And without relationship, I would have no memory. Without relationship to another, I would literally not be able to experience anything, in fact.
Mhm.
So one of the things that comes out there is, one, there's a necessity for mediation, but two, the structure of immediacy has to be itself mediated. I can only tell something is immediate, not in relationship to, or not being, related through a third to another thing. If I say something's immediately to my right, or the mouse is immediately in my hand, it means there's no in between there to keep it apart. But if there were no in between anything, if things were purely immediate, there would be nothing to be immediate to, and there would be no immediacy at all, because there would be no relationships of one thing not having a third thing with another thing.
Mhm.
So everything would just collapse to an abstract nothing, an abstract universality. It would say nothing and it would be nothing.
I see. It kind of has to flow logically.
Yeah, so here the structure of what I think the object is, I think reality is itself immediate, and therefore I express it immediately. So my belief of my ontology leads directly to my epistemology. One, I think that I have to know things immediately, which is not going to be possible. And I think that I have to speak them immediately, which is also not going to be possible.
Yeah.
But then the fact that I do this literally contradicts indeed what I say in word.
How do you reconcile that?
So for Hegel, like, the reconciliation is, well, I can see how, like, from my claim that reality is immediate, it is just what it is, and there should be no mediating factors. The actual fact of immediacy has proven me wrong. That there are immediate things is only because there is a relational distinction to other things. This itself is a universality. So a this is a this because it's not another this, and he calls this a negative unity. And a universal is just that for Hegel. A universal is just a unity. So any unity is a universal. It's not like an abstract universal like Platonic, or what people believe are Platonic forms, which are not exactly what they are. Or like a nominalist would say, oh, the number 3 exists somewhere. No, that's not what it is. A universal is any actual unity. So in this case,
way though, or
sorry, what?
Sorry, are these like similar to the Platonic way, or are these two completely different notions? Or does he
It ends up being similar, but it is radically different. So like he ends up calling the highest category in his system the idea, and this is because of Plato's idea. But he has a more detailed account of what the idea actually is, and why it gets to be the highest.
So he finds certainty within unity, therefore kind of destroying skepticism in a way.
Yeah, well, like this, yeah. So the account here is ontology leads to epistemology. Epistemology also leads to ontology. That the way that I assume to know, if I assume that, like a Kant, that my structure of knowledge is mediated, and obviously, like, it's there for the purpose of some kind of like existence, and that existence is the one that I live. Obviously, my capacities of knowledge have to accord with the reality. It's not possible for it not to. But in that case, we have a vicious cycle in which people's assumptions of epistemology lead them to believe what the world is, and people's assumptions of what the world is lead them to believe of what it is to know that. And what really happens is that at every case, everything that we believe to just be the case is nothing but a projection of what it is that we believe it is to know. And so the one thing that is necessary in all these confusions is that I understand that in knowing anything at all, the only thing I ever know is my own knowing. alienated from me. Like in ontology, what appears is my own knowing, my dynamic epistemology, reified as an object to me. And in epistemology, what I find is my ontology made fluid into a subjective process of a self-relationship of a subject reaching out to an object, insofar as one is a realist, or well, there are also anti-realists, and these just have problems as well. Like these are all covered actually in the book on the phenomenology of spirit. But that is the final solution. The final solution to skepticism is there is in fact one thing that I am certain of, absolutely certain of. There is no doubt about it. There can be no doubt injected into it, and that is that the only thing I know is my own knowing, and all along the way, I may have believed all these other things. I may have believed that there's just an external world out there, that it is real. I am, just a subjective appendage that, is inessential. It is the essential. It is the truth. I'm just the receiver, and all these other things. In all of those things, everything I find out every single time is what I find in all my objects is nothing but my own assumptions about how I know things.
My own assumptions about okay.
Mm-hmm. And this is why the end of the phenomenology is called absolute knowing. Guess what? Because it's knowing that knows itself. It's knowing that knows knowing.
Knowing that knows knowing.
And this is literally nothing but the end of every one of Hegel's books is nothing but a summary of the process of what's been going on the entire time. From the very first chapter, you have absolute knowing. Why? Because the only thing you've ever actually known is nothing but your own knowing. You just were ignorant that you knew your own knowing. And there is a specific form to your own knowing. It appears constantly, over and over from the very beginning. And this is the structure of what he calls logic, the speculative dialectic, the immediate moment and the self-mediate moment, abstract, negative, concrete, all that stuff.
How does that tie in with what you were explaining earlier?
That's how you beat skepticism. So that's the answer to skepticism. You're skeptical of reason itself. You're skeptical of knowledge itself. So the skeptic has a problem, and that is that they assumed that they know anything. They've assumed that their use of reason is valid. They've assumed that they know what reason is and that they get to critique others with it. And Hegel says, no, you don't get to do that. So if you're genuinely a skeptic, you can make no claims of your own. So what do you have to do? Well, there are other people making claims. And the question is, well, how would I know that their claims make any sense and that they actually work for this thing called knowledge, which I don't even know what knowledge is? That's the problem. That's the real honest problem of the skeptic. The skeptic really has no basis to say anything. They can't say what is false. They can't say what is true because they don't know. So they have to take up other people's claims and just see, do these people in what they say cash out what they say? If they cash out, then there's no worry. That's it. If the thing is as they say it is and it works exactly as they tell me it does, it's just going to be a self-confirming thing. I will see no problem. It will be perfectly rational. I will understand it, and that will be the end of it. No more confusion, no more skepticism. But insofar as these things end up being self-undermining, as a skeptic, the only thing I can say is, well, I don't know, from an external standpoint, to say, oh, the reason they failed is because they didn't live up to this other standard that I have. I don't have a standard. I let them set the standard. I let them hang themselves. The only thing I can do is I can observe, and observe what it is that happened objectively consequent to their own hanging of themselves.
But see, I feel like the trick with skeptics, at least, is they just keep adding axioms onto the problem, and I feel like that's a fundamental, at least a flaw within modern logic. I don't know if Hegel's logic is any different. That kind of resolves that.
Yeah, no, you don't have axioms, and you don't add anything. The thing is, this is something that people don't understand, and it's very bizarre. You can't ask why, and you can't ask for proof from nowhere. Somebody says, prove it to me. Okay, what does a proof look like to you? Do you even know what a proof looks like?
Yeah, how can we prove it? Sure.
Yeah, and so such a person can ask you why. Now, they're just verbally saying it, But when you ask a why genuinely, you have to know what it is that you're asking. There was somebody earlier here in which I had a dispute with about illusions. And they're like, well, I'm a subjectivist, I'm a solipsist, and I just think everything's illusion and you can't prove otherwise. I'm like, okay, see, in order for that to make sense at all, you have to give me a standard of what would count as not an illusion. And he was flabbergasted. And he was like, what do you mean? Like, well, look, everything's just like, you can't prove that there could be such a thing as not an illusion. I'm like, then what are you talking about? What is meaningful about an illusion if I can't ever tell what is not an illusion? An illusion doesn't mean anything. You're just basically telling me being is an illusion. Okay, you switched words. What's the problem?
Yeah. And you switched it and worded it out against him and you kind of got him.
No, but he got mad at me and he literally did not comprehend this. He said, no, you're not understanding. I'm like, no, you're not understanding. What you're saying is literally nonsensical. You have to have a criterion of the thing for success to tell me that I have failed. If you can't tell me what the success would look like, you can't tell me that I have failed.
Do you ever run into a problem where you have to justify yourself with reasons and rationality, and then you have another strict basis for, I guess, your belief system through Hegel, and they kind of clash? Do you ever have that?
Nope. It's one continuous logical system. It's great.
Gotcha.
There's literally nothing that I've encountered that has like put me in a stumped position in which like, shit, I don't really know how to answer that. Even if I've never thought about it, I can generate an answer, not as, like the answer, but I can generate an answer with something intelligible that's coherent with what I think. It's coherent with what other people generally experience. And which, the regular person more or less can understand, given a little bit of like background for like 20 minutes.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think that was all my questions. Well, I'll come back with more questions on and see if I can break it.
Yeah. Well, anyways, if I may continue just like a little thing about the skepticism.
Yeah.
So insofar as the skeptic only gets the skeptic doesn't even get to ask questions. This is something people can't fathom. That philosophy actually does not ask questions because it can't, because that would be to presuppose that you know anything. But philosophy is the understanding that I know nothing. So how am I supposed to begin? Well, the way you begin is, well, they are given facts. They are given existence. I am, I exist, I think. And, thinking is the medium in which my understanding comes about. It's not any other way. So, I'm not going to be immediately skeptical of my own thinking or thinking in general, because thinking is the very thing in which questions are asked. It's not possible. But that's not a justification. That's just the given fact. And so I go with the given facts. I go with the given claims that somebody makes. And the thing is, I'm a thinking being. I'm an existent being. If somebody makes a physical claim, you can physically show it. They tell me a machine works a certain way. Well, does it actually work? That's the question. If it works, then, that's it. That's the answer. I know that what they were saying is true according to the certain steps that were given the assumptions and all these other things.
We're running that Descartesian ethics then, huh?
Well, we're not talking about that yet. I'm going about something else. We can talk about that in a little bit. Just give me a couple of minutes. So anyways, I
have a request, if I may.
Well, give me a few minutes because I'm trying to finish a point for someone else here.
Okay. Yeah, continue.
So anyways, you can only go by what people give you, and you can only go by what is intelligible. So if somebody tells you, look, it's like programs. You set down the ground rule, and the ground rule for all of Hegel's stuff is always some kind of immediate, or at least the most immediate thing in that domain. Like in epistemology, the most immediate thing is I know what I sense. And the thing is, there's a meaning to that. So immediacy has a certain meaning. I don't get to just out of nowhere question it and say, what if immediacy is something else? No. I don't know what immediacy is. This person's telling me it is what this is. The question is, if I take that and I work with it alone, is it going to be what this person tells me it is? If it is, then it is. No skepticism. We got knowledge. If it isn't, then the reason for me to say it isn't is precise because it just isn't. The thing that I was told was what it was. They told me, the engine works, and then I turn it on and it doesn't. Well, I know something has gone wrong. And what's gone wrong is, well, the thing isn't what I was told it was. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to
I
know.
see.
So I insofar as I know why the thing has gone wrong. So for example, like the analogy of the machine or a gear machine. Somebody says, look, the machine's going to work. All these things. It's a clock, for example, one of those gear clocks. And I turn it on or I start turning the gears and it won't budge. Well, it isn't what they tell me. But guess what? I can look at the machine and I can go like, well, this gear's fine, that gear's fine. And then I find out somewhere there's a gear missing or a gear's broken. I can literally point at it. I said, like, look, here's the problem. Like, I'm not a watchmaker, but I can at least see that here is this specific problem. I don't need to know like, the general universal assumptions of everything else because we're just building up. We're going from basic units. So in the case of like sense certainty, for example, the fact that you want to say something immediate about the immediate, I can say that person is wrong because they are wrong. There is a mediating step. I can see it. I can point to it. And that's how the skeptic can move along.
That's a new form of skepticism that you just taught me, I guess.
Yeah, that's Hegel's skepticism, and he says this is absolute skepticism. This is a skepticism in which, like, I won't even assume my own rational system or other things to check people against. I just check people against themselves, and I'm a thinking being. They're a thinking being. I know what semantics is. They know what semantics is. And so long as the semantics is clear, everything is good to go. The experiments of reason can be carried out. It can be proven whether the concept somebody tells me about is what it is or it is not. And so at the end of the book, with absolute knowing, we finally get something which does not fail like the other things failed in the past. Everything else had some kind of little logical leap in between, some gap. In the end, there is no gap because now I have nothing between. It's knowing that knows itself. And I have been knowing this entire time. I've been engaging a process of cognition and understanding all along the various positions, moving forward and forward from each failed step. Somebody gives me one thing. Even though things failed, I can also see what worked. And I can stick with what works. And I can see there's a gap. And I'm like, ooh. Well, I'm not an engineer, but I can go to some other clockmaker, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, I can make that gear for you, and here's that gear." And then they make that clock. That clock works now. But then they tell me like, "Oh, well, this clock actually does something else," and now I get to see, well, is it going to do something else? Is it going to work the way they tell me it works? And I can just do it again. And each time, what's really happening is, from like sense certainty to perception, for example, what happens is I have a universal concept, and I have an individual instance. And then there's an interplay between my universal always becoming this particular because, a this is universal, but it's contextualized with other thises. So the universal breaks apart into particulars. This is a weird thing, but that is what happens. And then with all particulars, insofar as the particulars, I can see, well, if I have a this and I have another this, together they actually form a constellation of a present totality of this, like my present. So the parts come back and recombine into a universal whole, all on their own, like through a pure cognition of what it is to be the thing that I'm being told of. And so what happens with sense certainty is I step back and I'm like, okay, it didn't work like sense certainty told me it works, but there is something working here. And what's working here is this change of a universal to a particular and universal back to universal. I can see that. I can hold that because this works, but there's still some problems. There's still some gaps. So I stand back. What works is that movement, universal to particular, particular to universal. This whole thing is now what is called perception. In perception, I have the understanding of a universal with a particularity in it. To perceive is to perceive an instance of a universal.
Perceives to perceive a process of it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And that's how you build up and you build up and build up.
I see.
So it's
I
really
almost see it
ingenious.
as like yeah, that's actually really good. That I almost see it like it almost views like when it's talking about like language and words, it's instead of it something being stable, of something being more dynamic, interconnected with a like a string of other things that are like dynamically conjoining together and like breaking apart or whatever. That's kind of what I'm getting at. Or am I wrong?
Oh,
I
I'm
don't know if
sorry.
that made sense.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. No, so sorry. So it's like the way I kind of understood it was like what was the thing you said earlier? Was the thinking thing or the thought that thinks a thought or what was the? Sorry, could you say that again?
Is it about
It was the
absolute
initially.
knowing, in which the
I
only
think it was
thing we
about
know
absolutely
is our
knowing.
own knowing?
The only thing of our knowing is our own knowing.
Mm-hmm.
Like we only know of our actions, I guess, and then that therefore makes that action itself valid. It's like a circular logic.
Yeah, it is circular, but it's like it's what's called virtuous
Yeah,
circularity.
virtuous circularity.
And it has to be that way. If you think about it, just like even abstractly, if you think about zooming out to like ontology of the whole world,
Mm-hmm.
and you say, okay, there is reality, whatever it may be, and it is the whole of reality. It's what makes other things real, and there's nothing outside of it. Well, if there's nothing outside of it, there's nothing outside from which reality's reality would be given to it. And if reality just is, to say it just is like a brute fact, is to say
Mm-hmm.
that reality does not contain itself as reality. But there is no other place you can go to. There is no other domain from which reality would be given what it is. So if it is as it is, it has to be given within itself as it is. So reality must be self-reflexive. It must be circular. It must make itself real as the thing that it is, and all the things that it is within it. It's a logical necessity.
Don't we run into troubles when we're trying to define like the world as it is? It's like we can never really picture the whole world as it is in a current way. We're always stuck with different perceptions of the world as it is. Or like just saying like the world is, for example, like the world is this way. And I think we're like stuck. I feel like, sorry. I feel like we get stuck with different perceptions though, and it's like hard to map the totality of it, of a certain word or a thing.
Right. And that's why you're not going to begin with perceptions, but you're going to build from ontology. You're going to build from pure concepts. And that's why logic comes first, because the world is literally a concept of reason. There's nothing given about the world. I think there is a world. I make the distinction of there's a world and there's me, different and distinct from the world. This is a thing from reason. But how do I know that this thing is actually a thing in the first place? That it is what I claim that it is.
Because we think it, yeah.
Yeah, and so like if the thing and the world is not a thing before me, there is no world before me. It's not an object, a finite object that I can hold or I can perceive. This is only a rational object for me. So if there's going to be a proof of the world, it's going to be a rational proof. It's not going to be an empirical proof.
Gotcha. It makes sense. Wow. Yeah, you explained that really well, by the way. Good job. I don't know if my brain just picks up on like structuring and stuff. The way you structured it was really nice. The way you worded it.
Well, I mean, I thank you. I really try. That's my main purpose with this stuff. I want to be able to communicate it, and nobody else has been able to communicate it in the way that I have. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it.
True. All right. Someone else had a question. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know if.
I think they left.
Yeah, nobody's bringing else. There's only one other guy with us here, and I already know Iapetus. He has no questions. Or do you?
No, I had to solidify a lot of my knowledge today. I hung out with a friend, and I think he thinks I'm smart now. We talked a lot of philosophy.
I don't know, man. Like once you start thinking this way, it's probably really easy, and it's probably more Well, I wouldn't know, actually. It would seem to me more impactful because it seems to me this stuff is way more intelligible than some guy coming and talking to you about like qualia and quiddities.
Yeah. I actually said something very similar to your point because my friend doesn't really believe in objectivity, and I had to I made the point about how you're not in a position to say that. You're not really in a position the Pyrrhonian skeptic dilemma, and what is the answer to that? And I don't know. I'm really motivated to finish the encyclopedia soon. I met his friend too, which he was from India and he's going back. He's been here for like 10 years. Really interesting guys.
Yeah.
But also, I don't want to, take credit away from my friend who I was explaining this to because you need to have an open mind and he was actually thinking about what I was saying. And, without that, you might as well just talk to a brick wall.
Yeah, exactly. Like the guy earlier.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do you know that's good? Well, you haven't given me a measure of the good. What are you talking about? You just said it's subjective. And so what basis do you have? Actually, that's in the preface. Is it the preface? It might actually just be in the introduction as well, where Hegel points out the most obvious thing, and it feels so stupid that you don't think of it yourself. That somebody who already has placed himself in the corner in which he said, we can't know absolute truth, has basically admitted, I don't know what's true. And they're like, all I can do is make assumptions. That person has literally stated in their assumption, I assume that I am false. My own being is unreal.
Right. It's evil.
I don't have access to my own being. And I myself am not a being, cannot be a being. And therefore, why am I talking to them?
Right.
They're
telling you, they're basically telling you they're evil. Like, you are extending your own finite knowledge and projecting it onto everybody else, onto potential knowledge you could have about everything else. And it's not true. Why would it be?
Yeah, and they've already stated themselves to be false. And they're like, from falsehood, I will critique truth.
Right, yeah.
And they're like, your truth does not convince me. Well, yeah, you're false. No shit. A false being would never have access to truth. They would not recognize it, even if it hit them in the face.
What if it's just the fist simulating itself hitting my face, huh? What if it's not really a fist?
Yep. So anyways, V, if you have any further questions, or hello, Chi.
Yeah. Can I try a question? Sorry.
Sure.
How do you reconcile contradictions within perceptions of a idea, for example? Like, do you want me to give you one, or do you want to go for one?
Give me an example. What you mean?
Yeah. So, like, kind of like the biggest one I would say would be. Let me think. All right. For example, like let's give the like free will, for example, like deterministic versus like the ability to be a free agent. Like fundamentally, we could have like this compatibilistic point of view that kind of like reconciles it. But I feel like at what point do they meet? It seems like impossible, or maybe I'm just not understanding it. It seems very difficult to reconcile these things in like an appropriate manner where we don't really see where they cross and like at what point they cross, at what point they contradict each other.
Okay, yeah. Perfect, because I have a lot written on this and I've thought about this quite a bit. Recently, actually. So one of the issues is that people are not skeptical enough. They assume they just know unproblematically what freedom is and what the will is. That's a huge problem because it is not to be taken as obvious and given in philosophy that freedom is just whatever you say that it is. You know, freedom is linked with objectivity. When you say like freedom is obviously freedom to do something. When people like say freedom, usually they mean what Hegel called abstract freedom, and that just means freedom for limitation. Well, okay, if you have no limitations, you're not a specific being. If you're not a specific being, you're not a being at all. So why would you do anything? And they're like, oh, absolute freedom is freedom from all limitations. I would be God if I was not limited to time, space, to this body, to, sociality, to all these things. Well, if you weren't any of those things, you wouldn't be anything at all. So that concept of freedom is immediately, logically, no go. Complete nonsense.
Sound like a fucking nerd, nigga.
Okay, you're muted. So that concept, complete nonsense. The will also. People think, oh, the will is just choice. It's my capacity to choose. Why? Think about it, okay? If you think, like most people do, most people accept a theory of drives, for example, and you say, well, my choice is just to go, is to choose what is most pleasurable. Okay, if that's the case, there is no you making a choice. You're basically a kind of logic gate in which, whatever strongest desire happens to come about is going to open up the gate first, and it's going to drive you along. And if you say that's your will, well, that only makes sense as a case. Well, that also assumes you know what the self is. And that also assumes that you put it there. But obviously your drives in your experience don't come because you put them there. They are already there and they arise and you experience them arising. And, sometimes you like them and sometimes, you don't. So the will cannot really be reduced to choice because of it, or drives. And if you reduce it to choice and you say, look, well, suppose you have a situation in which I have two equally strong desires. Obviously then, one of them didn't barge through the gate. And yes, I'm more a realist, but we can get on that later. So one of them can't break through on the gate. They both break through at once. So it's like a dog chasing two preys, and they're both running in opposite directions. It can only go after one. So, if you believe the drive story and you think drives are exactly the thing that leads everything, then you're going to be stuck immobile between two tense drives pulling you which way. In the case that, the tension breaks, it's going to break towards one or the other in some manner.
Yeah.
But where is the factor where you decide that break? And you say, well, look, I just give myself metaphysically the power to decide, okay? Okay, but why? Because the problem most people
Which one
have
do you
is...
decide to repress?
Yeah, you have to have a reason why. Because if you don't have a reason why, then the choice is arbitrary. And an arbitrary choice is not a choice at all. It's a coin flip. There's no you to be had in there. And now if you said, well, look, I have some other ulterior desire. There's a third desire, actually, that's like a higher order desire. And that becomes the sift through which, I choose these lower desires. And insofar as there was these tensions between these two, this third one can take care. Okay, but did you put that desire there? No. So that desire is just driving you. Yes. So you basically just have a train car, leading the way. Where was the choice? Nowhere. So that conception of a choice is incoherent. It's nonsense. There is no choice.
What if you channel your desire or your drive into something that you would want to, I guess, like whether it be like for economic reasons, like working, or like a creative endeavor? What if you choose to channel your drive into that?
Right, but
into one or the other.
Yeah, but then that's from a higher drive. So that's just a drive, and you didn't put that drive there, now did you? Like it was there, it developed, and all these other things. So it's a train of drives, but nowhere is there the you.
Okay.
So the whole issue of I choose is that there's something specific about I-ness, me-ness, selfness, in which there's a meaningful thing about that choosing. But if I can make no distinctions between being driven and choosing and having arbitrary choices between, when I'm not driven by a third, choices does not exist in any meaningful sense, right?
Would it be purely deterministic then? In that case, that collapses either to pure indeterminism, arbitrariness, or pure determinism, pure drivenness. There's no third if you conceive of the will in that way. And when you conceive of the will that way, because of that, there is no will. It does, why would you speak about the will at that point? There is no third thing making a choice. All that's happening is either the drivetrain is going on or some arbitrary coin toss is going on. There is no will. So the usual common sense view of freedom is completely nonsense.
in the usual common view sense of the will is completely nonsense. And if this is what people are talking about, no wonder the problem is insoluble. It's literally being defined to be impossible because it's nonsense.
Let me think this, okay. Alright. So essentially, like, what you're saying is that the will itself is just kind of like a driving force going one way, no matter what happens.
Yeah, or in this case, there is no will. All that's reduced is there is a strongest desire, let's say, for whatever reason that may be, like historically, physically, whatever. And that desire is just driving the whole thing. And, occasionally there's a tension between other desires, but that driving desire can break the tension, towards one of the others because it fits into its system. But then that's not a choice, because it's not your choice. It's the determination of the desire. It's like one of those little child toys, where it has like the little shapes, holes, and you just fit the shape inside the hole and it goes in. That's basically what's happening. Where's the choice? Nowhere.
Wait, you hold to the a stance independent moral fact?
We're not talking about that right now. Sorry, you got to wait. I'm having a conversation.
Why can't the choice just be as simple as language use?
Well, because what people mean by choice is they intend to give some third factor about the self, which is making a meaningful distinction. If it's just a coin flop, a coin toss, my tongue's getting twisted. A coin toss. What is meaningful about that? That's not what people want to say about choice, but that's what they're actually saying about it.
It's you and me having a conversation right now, right? Like I recognize your agency in this conversation.
Well, we're not talking about that right now.
Are you saying you don't have
it's
any?
It's not about agency.
Are you saying you don't have any agency?
Yeah, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the will as such.
I see where you're coming. Like, logically, it makes sense.
Yeah. So, anyways, obviously, people have these myths, but they do mean something. There is something meaningful in the things that people want to say that they have not been able to say in the way that this is being put forth. So, regarding freedom, the thing about not being determined by another, that is meaningful. That is a real thing. It has to be. On the highest level, there's at least one free being in this world. And it is the world itself. The universe itself has to be the one free thing because nothing else would make it what it is. So, at the most
pure
minimal
action, pure.
Yeah. And it has to be a self-making action because there's nowhere else where anything that would make it be would come from. You can't even say it's random because then it would give itself its own randomness, not something else. So freedom minimally on the most abstract level has to be considered from self-determination.
Freedom itself from self-determination.
Yeah, so a self-making thing.
This is like pretty old hat from Eastern philosophy, right? Like it's basically spontaneity. Spontaneity, Lila.
No. Spontaneity is related to this,
yes.
but it's not this specifically.
Yes, spontaneity has to be the ultimate definition of freedom. Anything short of spontaneity is determination.
No, this is not against determination either. Well, it's determination from an other, and this is the difference. When people say determinism, what they're talking about is determination of what a thing is as the thing that it is, coming from another. Self-determination is still deterministic, but the determination is not coming from another, it's coming from itself.
Well,
therefore,
what is that
determination?
Self? What is that self then, if not spontaneous?
Well, no, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that there's a bit more detail to self-determination than just spontaneity. Because when people say spontaneity, is like it just happens and it comes from itself, but they haven't explained what that really means in detail. The theory that I'm talking about.
Can't.
Well, okay,
you can't.
okay.
By definition, you can't.
Okay, see that's a problem. That's a problem that I've already gone
It's
over,
not
called
necessarily a
abstract
problem.
freedom. Yes, it is a problem.
That's not necessarily a problem unless you want to make it a problem.
Well, no, it is a problem because it's a problem for reason, and we're talking about philosophy, which is reasonable. But anyways, I don't want to go into that tangent. I'm not going to into that tangent. I'm sorry. I'm having a conversation with V, and you can chime in, but I'm not going to let it go into tangents with other people breaking in.
With me?
No, not you. Just in general to anybody in the room. If you want to chime in with a topic that's going on, feel free. But if you start going on tangents, like on other topics,
I mean, that wasn't really a tangent. That was actually fundamentally related. But sure, I'll respect that.
Oh, okay. I accept that you see it that way, but I'm not seeing it. And anyways, V, do you know generally what I'm getting at with it?
Yeah, it's virulentful. Yeah, I made up the word. It's okay though. But I feel like there was a type of logical leap though that we had whenever we were talking about the drives. That just to clear it up at least. Whenever we said like the essentially the drives, one overcomes the other, therefore the drive is even if we choose another drive, that drive itself that itself becomes a drive, so therefore the drives kind of like destroy themselves, the category at least. That's what you said, right?
Well, the will destroys itself.
Or the wills, yeah.
Yeah. And in this case,
the concept of will.
Yeah, and in this case, like again, like when you said we can choose another drive, why? The usual account that people give is that I'm always driven. You know, it's like the human thing. You know, reason is a slave of the passions. Reason is not its own origin, or the self is not a thing that originates anything specific of its own kind. Anything that I can point out to as a desire is going to have a desire as its own reason. Or at least that's what most people think. And if that is the case, then there is no third thing to appeal to. And if you appeal to a third thing, well, what is the structure of that thing that's going to be different from a drive that is... Because if itself is a drive, then all you've established is, well, there was a drive behind the drive that I thought, but now I see that, you know, it wasn't. And therefore the will still remains destroyed. And if it's not a drive, we have to like establish what's meaningful about that. That it's not arbitrary and that it's not determined by another, such that eventually we have to settle down. Whatever this thing is, it has to be self-determining, and it has to be radically self-determining in the strongest sense. It can't just be partially. It can't be like a little bit of here. You can't have a little bit of self-determination. You either have it all in this case, or you have none of it.
Where are you going with this? Like, are you trying to define something?
I'm having a conversation with him. We've been having this conversation for like 20 minutes. So
yeah,
you
kind of
coming
in the middle of the... okay.
You coming in the middle is obviously you're going to be lost.
Well, I'm not actually lost. I'm trying to see where this is actually going. I've been listening. It's not like I haven't heard these kind of conversations before.
You definitely haven't heard of this, I guarantee it. And the fact that you don't know where this is going shows that you are lost.
Basically,
okay, well then impress me. Impress me, I'll wait.
In the beginning at least. Basically, the conversation had started because I wanted to say, how do you reconcile contradicting perceptions? Specifically, I pointed out to free will and compatibilism. So he started stating what it means to be free, what it means for the will, and kind of the will destroying itself through the drives, kind of undermining each other because it will become another drive. And then what necessarily does it mean to be free then? It has to be deterministic in that sense. That's kind of what I got out of it though.
It has to be deterministic in the sense of a determination, but not in the sense of other determination. Because in order for you to have freedom, it has to be a freedom for. If you only have freedom from, you're nothing. And therefore you will do nothing. There is nothing to do because only a thing that is, and only a thing that is determinate, that has a specific structure of what it is, has any process of doing anything. So the issue is that freedom has its own determinate structure, which does appear contradictory to people because they assume that limitations are a problem. But it's not limitations as such that are a problem. You need limitations. You need to distinguish yourself from other things in the world. You need, limitations to have a world at all, to be a self at all. And so to be free is a specific way of establishing limitations as self-limitation. So it's a self-limiting, self-determining process, which as the process of determining and limiting has a specific way that it is. It can't be willy-nilly, because that would itself would be arbitrary, and that would not be given by itself. So it's like a plant, or like any organism, insofar as you have a plant, say an orange tree, it comes from a seed, it germinates. What makes the tree a tree, essentially, is, like the organism as a species whole. There's something about that in which, like pure minerals on their own don't give you a tree. You can decompose a tree into like its basic carbon and all these other things, and put them with the water and all these things. It will not turn into a tree, because a prime factor of it is the living thing itself engaging the process of making its own body, creating its own stability as a physical body, maintaining itself, through homeostasis, and then reproducing itself as a species, and doing this perpetually. The thing, as the thing that it is, makes itself the thing that it is. It has conditions, in this case, sure. Has needs soil, needs sun, needs water. But once those things are given, the thing goes, okay, you've put the things that I need, I'll take it from here. I will build my own body, I will make myself out of all these elements, and I will keep on reproducing myself as an individual body, growth of branches and leaves and all these roots, and then, as other kinds, other individuals within my kind, as, flowers, seeds, and fruits.
Why are you just leaping into describing a plant as an agent? I mean, that's just how we project our perception of what is going on. Why are you
do you know what an
talking
agent
about the
is?
plant
Do you know what an agent is?
I know what I just listened to, and you
yes.
described
So
the
do you know what an
plant as
agent is? I did not describe a plant as an agent.
Yeah, you said, I'll take it from here. You give me this, I'll take it from here.
Okay, that's what you thought I was talking about? You didn't listen to all the other stuff before that?
Oh my God. Okay, go ahead. Say the rest of what you want to say.
Why do you want to argue?
Yeah, I mean, look, man.
I'm not trying to argue.
People jumping into
I'm not
conversations
trying to
and wanting to
I'm
argue.
trying to.
To
No, I'm
poke
trying
holes
to make
for no
an
reason.
insightful
Right.
comment that can illuminate something, and I
But
just
you don't even
know
understand where it's going and
where
what was discussed prior.
What I'm hearing is word games.
Okay, well, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to V. Yeah, I'm talking to V here. I'm not talking to you. So if you don't understand it, that's fine.
Torturous word games.
Wittgenstein has entered the chat.
Yeah, go study Wittgenstein somewhere else.
Yeah, man. I'm sorry. You're breaking the conversation and you're not adding anything useful. I'm not convincing to you. Well, congratulations. I'm not convincing to a lot of people who don't understand things. So what? Anyways, what was I saying? Okay, so the tree has a specific way of making itself what it is. And the tree doesn't want to be anything else than what it is. The tree wants to be a tree. I mean, yes, that's anthropomorphizing. The tree doesn't have a meta-subjectivity in which it's self-conscious and says, oh, I want to do this. But as the process that it is, it has an internal purpose of making itself that way.
One drive, if you would say.
Yeah, it has a drive for that. And that drive is the thing which reproduces itself as drive. That's what a self-determination is. A self-determination is a thing that makes itself what it is. It confirms itself. You start with a tree, you go through the whole process, get the seeds, and it grows back up to a tree. And that's how you know the thing is free. It makes itself what it is, reproduces itself consistently as what it is. And it has a specific process. The human process, particularly of this, is not a biological process primarily. The human process of this is a rational one. And here's the difference. So the structure of self-determination is this process of the one thing giving itself its parts, reunifying those parts as specific individuals, and then having a universal whole, or unity of individuals engaging in this constant process of self-making, self-becoming, self-othering, and a self-confirmation both individually and collectively.
Sounds Nietzschean.
Yeah, there's some stuff
that
like
part
that.
at least.
Yeah, then there's some truth to what Nietzsche says.
There's
On
a
the
lot of
side of
overlap.
on the side of reason,
Mhm.
what Hegel says about the will is this. He says the will is not to be confused as some new faculty of choice. That doesn't make any sense. Choice doesn't make sense prior to reason. The will is actually a form of reason itself. So there's a prior form called theoretical cognition, or theoretical reason, just put, which is my capacity to observe the world and conceptualize it as it, like, tracking what it is within my own mind. If I see that the tree has this process, my concept of the tree will also have this process. And that I know that this is what the thing is because it objectively makes itself. And when I say objective, like I don't know about you, but I actually love this about Hegel. I love this about philosophy whenever I encounter it. Being able to say things in like a very everyday sense. So when you speak of objectivity, most people here want to like say like, oh, mind independence, whatever. No, objectivity is quite literally one thing. When people say like objection, I object to this, I object to that, they're pushing back. An objective thing pushes back against external things which would impose and try to subject it. The plant
Subjected to their own objectivity.
Yeah. Subjected to their own ends, outside of its own individual ends. The tree, no matter how much I want to subject it, and I say I want this tree to be a goddamn dog. Well, guess what? The tree objects.
What if we just kill the tree, or we make it into paper?
Well, yeah, that's a limitation of objectivity. But still, like as the kind of thing, like for example, you kill the tree and you make it into paper. The paper, the pulp, objects. You can't take the tree and turn it into air, for example. You can take some air out of it, but you can't turn the pulp into air because the pulp objects.
Gotcha. Objects limitations. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So when I say like I can see that the concept is objective, for example, concepts also do the same thing. If I tell you, look, you have a 2D plane or a paper, a flat piece of paper, and with straight lines, I need you to make the minimal enclosure of a full space within that paper. Like, what's the least amount of lines that you need to like fully enclose a space within that paper?
I'm following.
So the answer is 3. And you will say, well, what if I wanted it to be 5? Well, the answer is 3. It doesn't matter. The conditions and the consequences of what you were asked to like undergo or the process to engage objects to any other desire you may have for ulterior motives to engage in it. It's not possible. Now, you may just refuse to engage the activity, sure. But the activity itself objects. The minimal structure is 3 sides, a triangle. If you say it's 4, you can still slice that 4 in half. It's a triangle. If you slice a triangle in half, it's still a triangle. You can't get out of it any other way. Likewise, if you talk about cause, the meaningfulness of cause is only in relationship to effect. If you say, well, what if I want cause to be like just independent, a cause in itself without an effect? Well, the cause objects. Because what it means to be a cause is that which has an effect. Now, if you switch the word cause to something like, birds or something, well, now you're being obstinate and you're not talking about the thing originally in contention. Cause still objects. So I know that things are objective when they object my willingness or my desire to make them other than they are, because they are what they are and they cannot be otherwise.
I feel like this is always contingent upon certain things, though. Where do you draw the line for the contingency of like possibilities of forms of like what you can transform it?
Well, the actuality. So if I give you the specific conditions, like the paper, and like the flat paper, and you can only use straight lines, that actuality alone allows you the possibility of 3 lines. That's it.
Okay.
And so from the standpoint of actuality, any question of possibility has to come from some matter in which, like the skeptic thing, you can only ask questions on the grounds that you have a measure by which you can ask the question and say you have failed or you have succeeded. So Hegel says, what about pure possibilities, or so-called logical possibilities, like Kant calls them?
Mm-hmm.
Well, are these actually mere possibilities? In the case of, suppose you will say, well, the logical possibility is just that which does not logically contradict itself. So, there's nothing logically contradictory. Suppose, there's 7-dimensional dwarves in, the 22nd dimension in the future or in the past, and, they are the cause of gravity. There's nothing logically incoherent about that. Except there is something incoherent about that. In which world do dwarves exist? Under what conditions does dwarfness even attain? Is there a meaningfulness to dwarves unrelated from all these other conditions? And the answer is actually no. The thing you actually stated, like in this case, this thing that you stated as a possibility, you know for a fact to be, as you stated it, impossible. To leave it open as like, well, no, you don't know that it's impossible because you don't know all the conditions that would, deny it. Well, you don't know all the conditions that would allow it. So it's a mere logical possibility. In being a mere logical possibility is just as an impossible thing.
I agree. I agree with that notion.
Another thing is the mere possibility. If it was not a mere possibility, if it actually was anything, has to be an actual thing. So in the concept of the dwarves themselves are not actual. They're impossible. But the relationship of, say, the dwarf is an organic being of some kind. Well, organic beings is an actual thing. And that's an actual concept that I know. I know it in the world system and I experience it in the world, as organic beings. So that aspect of it is actual. The conceptuality, this conceptual form of it is actual. So Hegel has this thing in which like the only things that really matter are actual possibilities. But when you have actual possibilities, you can have actual possibilities of like, okay, conceptually that's an actual concept. But the thing that I'm talking about is, as far as it goes, existentially impossible. And that's the only like logical possibility that matters, but that's not a possibility, that's an actuality. It's an actual concept. It's not a possible concept, it is an actual concept. Can't get away with it. And the only other measure that remains is, well, what about actual possibilities to the fullest extent? Well, all actual possibilities are just actualities that just haven't happened yet, but they will happen.
I feel like you're doing dialectics in IRL, in real life, or like in live.
Yeah, no, this is actually what Hegel says.
That's literally what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. I'm like following along. I'm like, okay. And then it kind of returns back to the world and the interconnectedness and how they're all related.
Right. And so this came from the point that you were talking about, like, well, there's a possibility open, that like, is a thing really what I say it is? Like, am I right about it or not? Could I be wrong? Well, the answer is, if I have an actual concept, I can't be wrong about the concept. So Hegel does admit this, by the way. He says, for example, he has a concept of gravity. He says, it may turn out in the future that the phenomenon of gravity is not described by the concept of gravity that I have. In which case he says, sure, I will be wrong about, this concept being what that phenomenon accorded with. It's like an illusion. You see a mirage and you think it's an oasis and you go up to it and eventually you find out, no, it's not. Now, are you wrong about what an oasis is, or were you wrong that the oasis, was actually there? Well, in this case, you're wrong that the oasis is actually there. In the case of Hegel being wrong about gravity, as it appeared to be something else, and therefore I defined it according to that something else. So I see a mirage, and I properly capture what that mirage is, and I call it gravity. But we get closer with instrumentation, we do experiments, and we find out, no, actually, that was all an illusion. It really is something else. And he says, okay, well then, we were under an illusion. I was wrong that the phenomenon was fully like in accord with what I said it was, because it wasn't. But I'm not wrong about what I said. And that's a big difference.
Through the basically the knowledge that he had at the current time was the only thing he can infer about the current objectivity of the truth at the time, right?
Yeah. Or in this case, the objectivity he described quite well. So he sees a mirage, he describes the mirage, and he says, oh, the mirage is a real thing. The lake is actually there. Then you get out closer and you find, oh, the mirage is not actually a lake. It's actually just a bunch of, like fumes of water vapor, causing illusion. Well, was Hegel then wrong to define the lake according to what he saw in the mirage? Well, the lakes are actually that way. There are real lakes. It's just that the mirage wasn't a lake. So in this case, if it turns out that gravity isn't what he says it is, well, it just turns out that what he calls by gravity isn't what the thing turned out to be. So either, people keep calling it gravity, or they can call it, something else, or Hegel changes the word to something else. It can go many ways. But the thing that he described was actually true. It just can't be wrong on that level. It can be wrong in the way in which, we misapply it. That's the only error that's going to be the case here.
Gotcha. But even that error is nullified or affirmed in a way. What do you call that thing? What do you call it though when it's contradicting, but it's both one essence of just the pure one unity, I guess? What do you call it?
The concept.
Do you just call it the concept, basically?
Yeah, that's what concepts are.
Gotcha. Just forms a new concept.
Actually, that's the process of the concept. And no language today, I think, actually has a standard use of such a lexicon, because by the concept, what is meant is a thing, a real thing. Just as we understand when we say stuff like qualities and stuff like essences, and a quality is a sort of just immediate thing, just the whiteness of it. And an essence is a bit more mediated, in which some kind of underlying thing conditioning some other thing or causing some other thing. The concept is another structural level of reality, in which it's no longer just the immediacy of a thing or a thing being mediated by another underlying it, some substrate, so it's substance or cause, but it's a thing that is self-causing. Its essence includes its appearance. The mediation includes the immediacy. And this is a new type of classification of being. That's just what it is. Just like how being, qualities and essences are classifications of a kind of relational structure of being. Concepts are a third classification of a new kind of relational actuality of being. It's not just that in my head. It's the being that is one, that turns into two, that also forms three, that is one.
Question: do you view these concepts as kind of flowing as well, or do you view them as static as well?
Both.
Or at least within both? Okay,
it's both.
That's what I kind of figured. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like change. Change in changing does not change.
Change within changing does not change.
Yeah, because change changes. But if it changes, it becomes different to itself. But if it becomes different to itself, it has not changed, because change is that which is different to itself.
Damn. I feel like I'm only understanding this because I have a pretty good read on Nietzsche. Honestly, I feel like all these things are just clicking.
No, good. That's very good. I usually shit on Nietzsche because we have people here who like Nietzsche and they're dumb, and they take really dumb things from him. But I do respect them, and I don't like his writing style, quite honestly. But I liked what I read in Zarathustra. I got 5 chapters in, but then I felt he kept repeating himself, and I just got bored with the book. But what I did read was impressive, and I'm like, this guy's a thinker. He has really good thoughts. At least in Zarathustra.
Zarathustra is a good book. I feel like Hegel systematically putting it like this makes more sense than reading Nietzsche's. It's very everywhere, I guess. It goes from one place to another, and I feel like it's hard to conceptualize it for a lot of people. So whenever they do get into Nietzsche, I feel like they pick and choose the things that they like from him, and they're not able to categorize it in a intelligible way. They kind of come with all this weird shit. But I don't know. That's just my take on it.
No, yeah, At least in Zarathustra, I haven't read anything else from him, quite honestly. Well, I think I tried reading Twilight of the Idols, but I found it really boring. Although, Twilight of the Idols is a good skeptical tract, according to Winfield, and I'll take his word for it. He's a good scholar. Respect him. But Zarathustra has good flowing thoughts. Zarathustra is actually very dialectical. It's amazing that people don't even realize
Is it really?
Yes. Very dialectical.
Oh, shit.
They're all over the place.
That actually makes sense.
There's something that I caught on, and I've never heard anybody else mention this, which is weird. Like in Zarathustra, he mentions many, many times, almost at least once every chapter, the thing about, let my overgoing, or rather, let my undergoing be my overgoing, which is a sort of inverted Übermensch of the person who knows that there is someone better and that someone who can do more, and the acknowledgement that I am not going to be that guy, but I can step aside and not be an obstacle to that guy or that woman, that person. And in that way, I have overcome myself. I overcome my own limitation as an Untermensch. I have let my undergoing be my overgoing.
Holy shit.
Should adopt that.
What's up?
More people should adopt that mentality.
Real. Yeah, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Well, even his slave master morality is a form of dialectics, I think. At least where he reconciles the concepts. But he also does talk in what is it? There's a specific language thing he uses where what is he saying? Let me think. What does he say? He essentially, the way he phrases his sentences and structures is in a contradicting way, purposefully to show meaning within the contradiction, which is kind of interesting. It's like his literary prose. There we go. What is the style that he uses?
Aphorisms?
No, it's aphorisms, but there's something else. It's more specific.
I mean, Hegel has his own form. He calls it speculative propositions.
Speculative propositions.
But his are not very poetic. They're quite boring, and they all of them are contradictions in which you can actually you must say like 4 of them. One of them is being and nothing are not each other. Being is nothing. Being neither is nor is not nothing.
Sounds about right.
And because the way he develops being, he shows that this is the case. They're not equally true, but they're all true.
That's literally Nietzsche. Okay. That's the same concept, at least. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm actually more excited to read it now. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I'm going to go on mute for a while. I'm just going to think about what we talked about.
Yeah, well, was the thing about... did the free will thing go anywhere for you? Did that open any thoughts?
No,
I had a lot more. I could say more about it.
I'm pretty sure that's the same Nietzsche and free will. It's not, maybe it wasn't conceptualized the same way, but it's he kind of has a similar notion where he kind of talks about how could we be free if we've never freed we never willed ourselves into existence, right? It was kind of brought upon for us in a almost deterministic way.
Right. And except with Hegel, the self-determination thing is you have to start out a slave to be free in the first place. You have to be something. And you're going to always be that something immediately first. So you cannot be self-reflexive from the beginning. So you wouldn't even be aware of you making yourself. But you are making yourself, but you're not aware of it.
It's just a continuous progress.
Yeah, so first you are, but then you have to be aware that you are. and you have to confirm that you are. The confirmation is the moment of freedom, fully realized. In which, like, the way that I am, so the way that I am is I am an embodied being. Obviously, I can't be free without a body. That would be nonsensical in the sense, like, I wouldn't be in the world in the first place. Obviously, if I speak about freedom, I want to speak about freedom in the world. So I have those conditions, physical and whatever. And then I have, like, psychological conditions, and supposing that I'm not psychologically fucked up, I don't come from an abuse background or whatever, I'm healthy enough that I can have, like, the resources to reason. And given the resources to reason, assuming that, I am a healthy reasoning being, I will have certain questions throughout my life concerning a sort of self-reflection and metacognition. And I can free myself both from the immediacy of, like, well, I just am, and I can go, like, well, okay, I don't just have to go with my first choice. There are better choices, higher and lower choices. And, I can just have those arbitrarily. I realize, oh, well, I really want this thing more, or, I don't want this thing as much. Or, there's society telling you, look, you ought to want this. And you're like, okay, fine, I'll go with that. And then I order my desires along that way. And then from that, I realize, well, there are real things I need to do if I really want to do them. And obviously, if I am not willing to do what is actually needed to do them, they can't really be part of my will, now can they? Because to will is to do. To will is to, like, get in the process of making something objective out there and not just some kind of thought in my head. That's what the will is for Hegel. The will is the form of reason that fully grasps the totality of my theoretical cognition, my conceptual understanding, as conceptual understanding, distinguishes it as here's concepts and here is the world. Here is, like, the objects of the world. And now I have a peculiar thing. The first object of my will is myself. My whole theoretical capacity, my whole thinking capacity, objectifies itself to me, internally to my representation, as I am. Like, that is the moment the will finally fully, like, exists to begin with. Then from that I am, since I am the totality of, like, my self-determining reason, and obviously the logic is the proof of self-determination of reason as completely independent and not conditioned by anything else, not even nature or feelings. Since I am this total rational self-determining capacity, I have a peculiar thing. Not only do animals may desire particular freedoms, but I desire absolute freedom, unbounded, unlimited. It is not an empirical object I have ever experienced. It's not an empirical object I can ever see or touch. And nonetheless, it is my highest desire, and it is my rational desire. Not only that, I desire my own reason. We want to know. We are thinking beings. Reasoning is one of our desires. And so this desire for myself as free and for the full knowledge of myself as rational, which includes the knowledge of all things through reason, this is the desire of the will, and it is what the will itself really is for its own purpose. All other things now subserve this one end. And obviously, along with that, I am already a conditioned being. I was born to a family I didn't choose. I have certain affinities and emotional tendencies I didn't choose. Now
physical characteristics, etc., etc. Yeah,
and that's how I am in the world. If I didn't have them, I wouldn't have any motivation to do anything. If I didn't like candy, I wouldn't eat candy. If I didn't like food, I just wouldn't eat food. It's that simple.
Ooh, quick question: How do you reconcile rationalism and empiricism? Because from what I've been getting so far, it seems like you only use empiricism up until its utility, and then you kind of switch over to rationalism, or rationalism, and back and forth. But how does Hegel reconcile it?
Hegel says there's no such thing as empiricism. All empiricism is nothing but a confused rationalism. Because an empiricist is always using concepts that they just assumed, and, like, you don't just go out in the world and, like, ooh, I see gravity, I have observed gravity. No, you didn't. This is a rationally, like,
you said
constructed
it earlier.
thing.
When you say this, it's a constructed thing.
Yeah, it's always a constructed thing. It's a very Kantian. There really is no such thing as empiricism. All things are actually derived from reason, even though haphazardly, because like sometimes people just make shit up. Like some people are like, oh, I think freedom is just, freedom from. Well, yeah, that's somewhat true, but you also just kind of like pulled it out of your ass, and you have to have a justification for it. So a lot of things people pull out of their ass. In science, this happens a lot, in which, people say, oh, we have evidence for black holes. Where'd you get that? Well, you define the black hole in a certain way. You look at it in the world and look, and you see something that looks like a black hole phenomenally, and you're like, oh, therefore it must be a black hole. Except, we can't go and check. Unlike the mirage, it's like a mirage. It may be a mirage. We see it, but unlike a mirage on Earth where you can walk up to it and, see that it is a mirage, because it will disappear if you get close, we can't get close to that thing. We can't touch it. We can never do the experiments to prove that it is the thing that I claim that it is. And so I can say that it is so many things. Go ahead.
So like from my understanding in your worldview, all this maps out perfectly. Like the logic is like sound, right? If you're arguing with someone though, I feel like you almost, like I said, I think I brought this earlier. There is like a conflict of concepts of logic and of values to begin with. I mean, because you're fundamentally it's a whole different worldview than what like a normal like rationalist would have, right? Mm-hmm. So I feel like fundamentally you would clash with truth, or with what would be truth, what would be rational.
Well, see, in the Hegelian worldview, people can actually be wrong. And
yeah, you would just say they're wrong then, and then you would prove. Okay, yeah.
No, yeah, look, and it's true. Makes sense. Like this is something. If you haven't learned it yet, you will learn it in due time. People can be wrong, and not realize that they're wrong, and no amount of explanation from you will ever convince them. And you know why? Because they don't think.
I already know that. Yeah, or no, they don't. It's the walls that they have up.
Well, no, that and the problem fundamentally is they don't think. So like a lot of people just believe and box themselves in. It's not I believe first, and therefore I don't think. No, that does happen, but it's really rare, like really rare. And usually you can tell when that is the case because you can tell the person is afraid, and this is only something I've ever seen with religious people particularly. And that's why they refuse to think out of fear. Because they're afraid of like hell, and they've been told their entire life, you can't question these things. That's the only time I've seen this genuinely be the case. All the other times, what happens is the reason a person gets into a stubborn position is primarily because they don't think. And if somebody doesn't think, there's no way that you, as a thinking being, giving them reasons, can ever get them to see it. Because they are not operating, they're not playing on the playing field. They're not playing your game. They're playing what they think is a game, but it's not really a game.
I will say though, I mean, it's really hard to state what you're stating to a lot of people, and for them to understand it and like be able to follow that, like logically follow down through your conversation. I feel like that itself is really difficult for like a normal person to do. Like
it is.
The terms you use, the logic you use, the way you like form your narratives. It like flows logically, and I feel like a lot of people kind of get lost at one end, and they don't know how to come back to it or like make sense of it.
No, but we know what's funny. The only people who I've encountered who are like absolutely stubborn and like do not get it, and like who don't get it at all, are people who have studied philosophy. The common person, I can tell this stuff too. They grab onto it pretty quickly. They get the analogies that I'm talking about. They're like, okay, that makes sense. Obviously, they don't get on the full understanding, but I'm not saying unintelligible things to them. What I'm saying is actually very close to what the average person thinks. They just never justified it to themselves in that way.
Or like realized it.
Yeah, they just never realized it. When you think about the world,
sorry, like the people in the chat, like I don't know if you saw like people in the chat earlier were like, don't listen to what he's saying, like it doesn't make any sense. It's like they weren't able to like make sense of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and a lot of it is they don't think, and I
what
think
what are you guys talking about?
Just Hegelian philosophy in general.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
are you talking about how Hegel is completely incomprehensible?
No, it's about.
I mean, this is a good example, right?
Yeah.
Like, people think the barrier to entry should be as simple as, oh, I think, right? It takes a lot of dedication and understanding especially the history of the tradition to even engage in this stuff. Not even actually. Like, it just takes an open mind, and a lot of people don't have that, unfortunately.
Yeah, chair.
No, you have to have that structure. I think of like the Western canon philosophy.
I don't think so.
I don't think
not
so
to
yet,
engage in
because
the
that's
system.
not my
You don't think so?
experience. Hegel was my first actual philosopher. Beyond that, I
Jeez.
took like 2 philosophy 101 classes, and I found them boring. Everything I learned in those classes, I learned outside of class, like reading other materials.
Wait, and
It
you're
was actually
Hegelian?
because
The
of
only
Hegel,
philosopher
I looked into the tradition.
Why is it that every single person who's like into Hegel has only ever read Hegel?
I didn't say I've only ever read Hegel. I said
I've read
Hegel
other
is
people,
my
so-
first major philosopher, and the only philosopher I put in at this much effort. I mean, as far as like,
Yeah.
did I read Hume? Did I read Kant and some stuff? I read the stuff abstracted in the philosophy 101 classes. Sure.
That's good. You don't need to read. You don't need to read them.
No, yeah, and I don't think I need to read them. I mean, they're wrong. I realized they were wrong before I even got into Hegel. Like, there was a problem.
What are they wrong about?
Everything.
Well, that's a very blanket statement.
Well, that's a very blanket question.
No, it's a question.
Well, if you had been here to the prior stuff talked about, you would understand why you can't really ask such questions and expect an answer to satisfy you. The question itself is unsatisfied and unsatisfying. But anyways, I was talking to V.
Well, no, I was asking for an example.
Well, we're not gonna shift to that. I was talking to V. I want to finish that conversation first.
All right.
We can go into that if you're still around after we're done. Because I have an answer for you. You probably won't like it, but I do have an answer in much more detail.
Well, you don't know me, so how can you say I won't like it?
Well, given the way that you've asked, you follow a certain profile. So, very likely, but I could be wrong.
There's no way you would be able to guess what I am, right? Like what my...
Anaki's a top G.
No, but... There's no way you can guess what I am. You're here Hegelian, and you have no idea what that means. Guaranteed.
Okay. I don't think you have any idea what it means.
Well, take one to know one.
No, I'm just saying, like, isn't it kind of ironic how you just, like, parroting everything I'm saying?
No, I mean, I'm the one who's been talking for a couple of hours here. I've proven my substance. You just came in, but enough with the digression. What are we talking about?
You were talking to this Richard. Yeah.
You were saying something.
I'm currently reading Anti-Oedipus, and I even see a lot of like similarities there with like Deleuze and Guattari.
Oh, dude, there's a book. I hate Deleuze's writing style, so I can't stand it. Too French.
It's not that difficult.
No, it's not. That's not that it's difficult. It's annoying. It annoys me greatly. Okay, like I've gotten so used to Hegel, and Hegel is like super dense. Like he says so much in one sentence, like no bullshit, like no fluff, just straight,
like
straight deductions, like constantly.
Yeah.
Deleuze does not write that way, and it drives me crazy. I tried reading Schopenhauer because there's a Schopenhauerian I want to talk to. It took Schopenhauer 12 pages to say something that should have taken 2 pages maximum with repetition.
Sounds like Aristotle.
It's horrible.
I don't like that at all.
Like see, the Aristotle stuff I can understand because those are lecture notes. Those weren't like writings, like specific, like structured writings. They were notes from students. In a lecture, you become very repetitious by necessity because, you got to constantly refresh people's memories. You can't just be this deduction. It's not going to happen.
Yeah,
but in a written work, you can do that, and you should do that. It is so good when people do that because it does not waste my time. It feels just ugh. And that's how I feel about Deleuze. Deleuze just goes on and on about shit that I do not care about. I'm like, get to the fucking point, man. There's a book
body
though,
without elegance.
difference and difference and Givenness by Levi Bryant. That book,
Givenness by Levi Bryant.
yeah, it's about Deleuze's metaphysics, indifference repetition. It's very intelligible. I like it. I don't know that it's true to Deleuze because I haven't read Deleuze, so I'm not going to be able to say. But I trust that Levi Bryant knows what he's talking about because he's a very charitable guy. What he says about Hegel.
Metaphysics are?
Well, it's just kind of explaining the concepts of in the whole book of difference repetition. A little bit of the background before and like the essays that build up to it, like particularly the one on Bergson and the one on what is it? Sense, the logic of sense. Anyways, he does a great job. It's very clear. One of the things that I just kept coming to in that book is Deleuze was basically reinventing Hegel, dude. Like, at least the way Levi Bryant presents it, Deleuze literally reinvented Hegel and did it worse. Like,
it's kind of like
so
the
many,
rhizome.
Yeah, so many of the things that he does, he's like, Hegel didn't understand this. I'm like, but that's literally what he fucking said. I don't understand. I don't understand what your problem is. Because you're going by something so close to what he says. Now, obviously, the way Bryant probably phrases it may just make it more apparently amenable in that way than like his straight writings. But he has like a bunch of block quotes. And a lot of the stuff in the block quotes is I'm like, this is straight up Hegel. I don't get it. Why did he hate him?
Well, see, it's because, well, what is it called? He was actually like Deleuze was a Nietzschean mostly. And then I think like a lot of his Marxist so he like kind of like he almost like merges like Nietzsche and like Marx, and I feel like Marx gained a lot from Hegel. So then I feel like Nietzsche was already similar to Hegel, so all these are connected and they kind of formed into a weird Hegel type thing philosophy that he wrote.
No, yeah, because I'm not joking.
That might be similar.
Yeah, I'm not joking. Like, read Hegel enough and then read something like, well, Deleuze or Levi Bryant's covering each of it. It looks just straight up like Hegel. I don't understand. Like the way he defines his idea. He defines the idea as a problem. Well, guess what the idea is for Hegel? It is a generation of contradictions, which are what? Problems.
Problems.
The way he defines concepts is as functions, in which, you start out with like an identity, it goes into multiplicity, like just like a function or a program.
Multiplicity.
Yeah. And that's what Hegel does. That's what a concept is.
Damn, it's all circling around.
So many things are just like, I'm like, what was your fucking problem? Like, why did you reinvent the wheel? That's one of the things. Like, it is stated by other people that it's very likely he didn't really read Hegel. Like, he read Hegel through, what's his name? His teacher. Not Kojève. Oh. No, not Kojève, the other guy. The other French dude. I can't remember his name right now.
What is Hegel famous for?
Ruining every philosopher's life after him and making them angry. The analytics hate him. Continentals hate him.
So what is his philosophy in like? Is it describable in like 2 statements?
No, but I can try. So one point is there's only the infinite. The finite is part of it. Another part is a unity is always a unity of multiplicities. The multiplicities are not identical as multiplicities, but are unique, and so they're individual multiples. So, this part and that part are clearly not the same parts, so they are individuals that way. So that every instance of universality necessarily has particularity, multiplicity, in other words, and individuality as moments, including a revolving circuit of these 3 at the same time. So that if I have a universal, like a concept, the universal as universal exists. It involves its own particularity against particularity, and it is its own individuality because as a particularity, it's not particularity itself. Particularity itself has a universal moment in which all particulars are particular. So it's universal. But not all particulars are the same. The particular and universal are not the same particularity, they're individual. And every individual is an individual in the fact that it is the unity. And all particulars are individuals necessarily, and all individuals are universal. So everything's subsumed as an individual. Every individual is particular and universal. So there's a triple repetition with an emphasis on each side, and each one happens at the same time with everything, always. And that's how reality is, and that's how truth is.
I like it. I like it a lot. I agree with all of that.
Hippolyte, I think.
Oh yeah, Hippolyte.
Hippolyte.
Yeah. Deleuze studied under Hippolyte, and he actually wrote a review of one of Hippolyte's books, and it was, I think, like a bit lengthy, about 10 pages or so. And so there's some explanation as like what he views Hegel as through Hippolyte in that. Because yeah, like it's hard for any to believe he actually read Hegel, and if he did, that he read anything carefully, because he repeats so many of the things that Hegel does, and then claims that Hegel doesn't understand things. And I'm like, but you're literally doing what he did. Like what he says about absolute difference is what Hegel says about absolute difference. I don't get it.
I know people like that.
Because Hegel says,
like,
because Hegel says absolute difference is the difference which is different to itself. And what does Deleuze say? The same fucking thing.
yeah, I think maybe he's trying to like take his seat at the table, you know, trying to steal his seat.
That's the thing people try to do. And I mean, when you think you're right, and you want to be the top dog, and so you go for the biggest dog that you can take out.
I mean, he probably made it more digestible too. I haven't opened my Spirit of Phenomenology, but I would imagine Anti-Oedipus is more digestible than the Phenomenology. Just
Spirit
like
of Phenomenology.
Yeah, just
Sorry.
like right off the bat. No, you're good. You're good.
No, yeah, and like, the same thing about logic. Okay, like, it struck me that, I thought that when I saw the title, Logic of Sense, I thought, it's like the senses, vision, touch, whatever. No, he means the logic of sense in that way, but also in the way of like meaning, the sense of something that makes no sense. Well, guess what Hegel's logic is? It's a pure logic of sense, absolute semantics.
What's absolute semantics?
It means that, it's something that is not going to be referring to a structure of physical things like objects out there or mental phenomena like feelings. It's going to be a purely linguistic construct, say like something like immediacy or mediation, subject, object. These things are meaningful in relationships to structures of grammar and relationships of abstractions as such. They don't have any reference that you can point to in the world. And so when somebody does not understand those, the problem isn't a problem of exemplification. The problem is a problem of thinking. Either the person is capable of thinking the thing or they are not. And so, when you're not able to think a thing, the immediate response is not, well, gee, I'm stupid. No, the immediate response is usually, that doesn't make any sense.
What do you mean by think a thing?
To tell the relationships being talked about and the distinctions.
I gotta go to sleep. Okay.
All right, see you. Good night, man. Good chat. Nice meeting you.
Good night.
Thank you.
I have a channel and a blog and a lot of essays. You can check those out if you ever need some reminders on stuff.
Appreciate you.
Like, is like thinking of a basketball. Is that like thinking a thing?
No. Because in that case, even if you don't like understand it, you can look at it and you're like, okay, I see the basketball. The person tells me this is a basketball. It has a shape, color, whatever. I don't have to understand what is it to be a basketball. I can just like see it, intuit it, basically. I don't have to understand like any abstract concepts of shapes or round. What is it actually to be round? None of that. I can appeal to the object itself. With something like a subject, object, or a verb, there is nothing to appeal to other than the assumption that you and I are communicating something that we both already understand. And if you don't understand it, it's like describing color, or rather, no, it's like describing vision to a blind man. I can try and try and try, but I can't get you to see. And you can get some like guesses about, okay, what you're saying sort of kind of makes sense, but sort of kind of makes sense is not good enough, for philosophers generally. You want to have something that fully makes sense.
So by saying like absolute semantics, is the absolute part meaning to describe like the exact thing that they are referring to?
In this case, yes, and in particularly of abstract relations relating to abstract relations.
Okay.
And if somebody cannot think abstractly, which is what really thinking is in general, then no amount of me trying to explain it to them with examples, no amount of me trying to rephrase it, none of that will ever like get through to the person, because it's me trying to get them to see when they have no eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And most people obviously do not assume that they're the ones who have no eyes. They assume the other person's just bullshitting, which admittedly is probably the proper response to many things.
Yeah. Do you know anything about aphantasia and
Yeah, aphantasias where people can't visualize things in their imagination inside. They don't, like, you tell them about an apple, they don't see an apple inside their head.
Right. And then like the people who like can visualize, like who have hyperphantasia, they're like, well, how the heck, so what are you thinking like when you think? It's like, well, like they like feel, for them thinking is like meaning it or feeling it or something. It's I yeah, I mean, I was also part of that group. I didn't even know like that the other group even existed. And then
Wait, you have aphantasia or you don't?
I grew up with aphantasia. I thought it was normal, and I'm pretty sure it was normal in my world. The idea of someone having like exact visuals of their thoughts and stuff was actually out of the ordinary phenomenon. But now that we have social media, it's showing that it's actually half of the population that experiences it. So it's like crazy.
Well, I don't buy that. Like, that is a weird statistic, because like the only people I've ever met, and I've met a lot, that have told me about aphantasias being like people online, it can't be 50% of the population.
I thought it was like normal. Like I don't know. I think it's.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't see a problem. Like, it's just like people like, wow, you don't see it? I'm like, okay, yeah. I believe it. I mean, I would think that that's actually something like what a lot of people like autism or whatnot experience, in which I don't know, like, so is it just a visual thing? Or is it just like a total imagination thing? Like, you can't imagine sounds or you can't imagine feelings?
So yeah, no, like so that's like what we would have referred to as hallucinations. Any type of visual or auditory uh thing that you heard in your head would have been like what we would call hallucination. So um actually
But can you recall feeling?
Yeah, feelings, yes. Memories, yes, but there's no visual representation. It's like uh it's different. So um it
Sure, I mean,
my
sure.
my theory was that the people who do have like auditory who have like an internal voice, like an auditory internal voice, and like who can see visual representations of their thoughts